Many conservation biologists here in the Philippines would say that the most important problem that we have right now is habitat destruction, which is still ongoing, still happening in many places in the Philippines. And the root cause of that is massive growth in population. Protected areas, national parks, or natural parks are still not secured from habitat destruction. Again, because of a growing population of usually marginalized or impoverished population that are destroying the forests in order for them to plant basic agricultural species. You cannot do conservation with a population that is still impoverished. That's one challenge here in the Philippines are still trying to resolve. Of course, global warming is a big issue, but the immediate concern that this country should focus into is how to save or to protect the remaining natural habitats amidst an increasing human population.
There are only two herpetologists in the country, Arvin Jesmos and myself.
Why the Philippines? For me, I'm just genuinely sort of profoundly fascinated by island archipelagos in general. I grew up in Ohio, landlocked in the middle of the United States. There's very few geographical barriers to limit the distributions of animals in that part of the world. And the idea of inhabitable packets of land separated by an inhospitable matrix, the ocean, is just really fascinating to me.
I've known Rafe since 1993, so we've been friends for over 20 years.
Arv and I have formally published and named about 100 species right now, and then we have about 40 or 50 more that are at various stages of description right now.
I've enjoyed doing field work with him, especially when we're just trudging along in the forest at night, catching all those cool frogs and snakes and lizards, planning about projects on herpetology, like trying to figure out where Taylor found a species of a certain frog.
Of course, the only guy that studied amphibians and reptiles really in the Philippines who really stayed in the country was Ed Taylor.
So Ed Taylor finished 1 degree here at KU early on, went to college here. And then I think he literally writes in his memoirs, I decided I was going to see the world and have some adventures, so I went to the Philippines. His first job was a civil service appointee. He landed after taking an exam through the United States government, because at that time the Philippines was a territory of the U.S. after the war. But what he did was he taught school children, young boys, in central Mindanao. So retracing Taylor's footsteps in the Philippines, we haven't sort of gone through his whole travels and all of his itineraries. And he's certainly been to places, especially in the southern Philippines, that we've never been, or that I've never been. But it's become really clear to us that we needed to get back to that exact same spot to be sure that we had the right species in our hand. So a great one is an example of the northern Cordillera, the northern part of Luzon. Around 1998, Arvin and I realized that several of the species that Taylor had named from that area, those names were being applied from different parts of Luzon in a sort of indiscriminate way. Taxonomists were using them to identify species, and they were doing it from different localities, and we could imagine that those might actually be the wrong species. So we realized that we really needed to go to that exact same spot in the northern Cordillera and record those frogs in life so we knew what they sounded like.
I met him in the hospital. He was sick somehow, maybe a minor ailment at the time. When I talked to him briefly, And well, my impression of him was, I think he was okay as a specialist, although he complained about other authorities in the field of herpetology because he said they sunk his species into synonymy.
And both of them were great scientists for their day and the ways in which they practiced their art, basically. At that time, especially given the data and the way people practiced taxonomy, there was a lot of subjectivity involved in what people named and described as new species. In Taylor's case, he saw all these animals alive, and he had a really sharp eye for variation, but he had a different philosophy than Inger, who worked with preserved biological specimens and who took a different approach to the taxonomy. Fundamentally, the reason why he ended up sinking a lot of Taylor's species was that he had a different philosophical approach called the polytypic species concept, and it really is a formal definition of what constitutes a species. Looking back on it, I see strengths in both approaches.
Certainly, Taylor was also assisted by a few Filipinos who served as either technicians or collectors for the Philippine Bureau of Science.
Somebody told me about Ed Taylor that when he goes to the field, he would shell out coins, Philippine coins, and ask the children to collect amphibians and reptiles for him. That is how he got so many species, and he described so many species. I went through history of the Philippines, and I noted that all the authorities in the field of herpetology were foreigners. And my goodness, I said, why should not Filipinos be authorities in amphibians and reptiles of the country? Why should we depend on foreigners to study our own fauna? I, for example, really did field work. Stayed in the fields every summer for about 1 month to 1.5 months. Every summer since 1954, I was in the field up to 1970s. And so I'm thinking of retirement, but I cannot retire. We need to have people to follow after us. We have to contend with climate change because while we protect, climate change destroys what we protect. Arvin is my hope that he will in turn look for younger people to be his colleagues. That's my hope.